Now, many of you are probably familiar with the background of this, but I do want to give a little bit more context because more information has come out about this. So you do know a couple of days ago, the FBI did raid Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. I have to say residence because some people don't like the other word. And so there were documentations that they took from his residence, and more information has now come out about that. Now, this actually leads into the Russell Brand and Kim Iversen discussion. But first, I want to explain to you what they found. And then I want to explain to you what an espionage actually is. I need to go through that as well and how it has been used historically before. And then we're going to get into that video clip. So let's go ahead and get started here. Now, this came from Politico. FBI search warrant shows Trump under investigation for potential obstruction of justice, Espionage Act violations. So let's go ahead and get into this here. A search warrant newly unsealed on Friday reveals that the FBI is investigating Donald Trump for a potential violation of the Espionage Act, and that agents removed classified documents from the former president's Florida estate earlier this week. So, a receipt accompanying the search warrant shows that Trump possessed documents, including a handwritten note, documents marked with TS/SCI, which indicates one of the highest levels of government classification, and another item labeled Info, RE, President of France. Also, among the items taken from Mar-a-Lago this week, an item labeled Executive Grant of Clemency, RE, Roger Jason Stone Jr., a reference to one of Trump's closest confidants who received a pardon in late 2020. The warrant shows federal law enforcement was investigating Trump for removal or destruction of records, obstruction of justice, and violating the Espionage Act, which can encompass crimes beyond spying, such as a refusal to return national security documents upon request. Conviction under the statutes can result in imprisonment or fines. Now, let me just step in here for just a little second. I will be personally surprised if he's actually imprisoned. I'll be surprised. Like I said before, he has a lot of money. He has a lot of resources to beat this sort of thing. I will say that I have this feeling that I feel like they're trying to make an example out of him. And I think that, and I got to say this very clearly because some people will clip this and try to make it seem like it's something that it's not. I am no fan of Donald Trump, but I will say this. I think that because of the things that happen, when you look at someone like Donald Trump, I feel like the US government feels like he basically was saying the quiet parts out loud. They cannot have that happen again. They do not want someone like that again. And then number two, I mean, he actually, when he was president, I mean, he had a large following. Whether we like it or not, he had a large following. He was able to speak to a lot of people that were willing to go so far as to go to the Capitol in January last year. So they see someone like him as, whoa, this is a bit too dangerous. He's calling out things that we don't really want him to call out in public. And I think they're trying to make an example out of him. I really do. Let's go back in. The documents unsealed after the Justice Department sought their public disclosure and relentless attacks by Trump and his GOP allies underscore the extraordinary national security threat that federal investigators believe the missing documents presented. So again, this is what they believe. I don't know for sure what those documents actually present. This is what they believe. So I do want to highlight that. The concern grew so acute that Attorney General Merrick Garland approved the unprecedented search of Trump's estate last week. The disclosure of the documents comes 4 days after Trump publicly confirmed the court authorized search of his Mar-a-Lago home by the FBI, marshaling his political allies to unleash fierce criticism of federal investigators. But the details in the warrant underscore the gravity of the probe, an unprecedented investigation of a former president for mishandling some of the nation's most sensitive secrets. So, and I believe I played this clip last week. Now, what I want to focus on here is the Espionage Act, because that is something that the DOJ is considering using against Donald Trump. So we're going to look at a couple of things here. What is it? Has it been used before? And who was it used against? So let's go ahead and dive into this. What is the Espionage Act and how has it been used? So let's get into this. The Espionage Act, a World War era law once used to stamp out dissent, eventually became the government's legal tool of choice against spies and unauthorized leakers. But now for President Donald Trump, he faces questions about whether he violated the act under the FBI. After the FBI seized top secret documents that he had taken to his Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida. Now, here's where some of the backlash comes in. In recent years, some on the left have criticized the law, saying it was used to prosecute people who leaked government secrets. Now, Republicans are denouncing the act after the Justice Department referred to it in its search warrant to retrieve documents from Mr. Trump's home. But what is it? What is the Espionage Act and how was it first used? This part is important. Congress first passed the Espionage Act in 1917 at the urging of President Woodrow Wilson in a bid to quell dissent against the United States support for World War I. The act prohibited obtaining or disclosing information related to national defense if it could be used at the expense of the U.S. or to the advantage of any foreign nation. In 1918, a set of amendments prohibited speech considered disloyal or abusive to the United States. And we're going all the way back to censorship, which we still have a problem with now. During the war, for example, the producer of a film, The Spirit of 76, was prosecuted under the act and sentenced to prison in 1918 because the government believed the movie undermined the British, a World War I ally, and was therefore seditious. Now, that is coming from Mark Zaid, a national security lawyer. Now, this piece right here, to me, that kind of sounds like censorship. I don't know. What do you guys think? That's what it sounds like to me. So let's go back in here. It goes on to say there were rampant abuses. There were tons of First Amendment violations. It didn't take them long to realize that was ridiculous and unacceptable. So there you go. And this is one of the reasons why people have been criticizing it. So let's go down here. Does the act make it a crime to reveal classified information? Everyone pass this on to your friends. No. The law criminalizes the unauthorized retention or disclosure of information related to national defense that could harm the U.S. or aid its enemies. It was enacted decades before the executive branch established the current system of classifying national security secrets. So, in normal circumstances, a document protected by the Espionage Act is almost certainly classified. But Because the two protection systems, executive branch classification and the Espionage Act, work in parallel, a document does not need to be classified to be protected by the act. So that's important for people to note. Anyway, long story short, it sounds outdated and it sounds a bit ridiculous. But who has been prosecuted under it? Because people have been prosecuted under the Espionage Act before. The law has been used to prosecute both spies and leakers. Those accused of spying under the act include Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in the 1950s for giving nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. Also, Aldrich Ames, who was a CIA officer who was charged for revealing the identities of American informants to the Soviet Union in 1994. Also, Robert Hansen, an FBI agent who was sentenced to life in prison in 2002 after confessing to selling secrets to the Russians. Anyone notice a pattern here? Let's see. The first individuals here, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, accused of giving information to the Soviet Union. Aldrich Ames, charged with revealing identities of American informants to the Soviet Union. And of course, we come down here with Robert Hansen, 2002, accused of selling secrets to Russians. Anybody notice a pattern? Let's remember, Russia wasn't always Russia. It was once Soviet Union. Just something I'm noticing. Eric says the whole Cold War was BS. Crazy, huh? Let's go a little bit further here. There's more. Prominent leak cases involving the act included that of Daniel Ellsberg. Now, Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers by photocopying the secret history of the Vietnam War and giving it to the New York Times. He was initially charged with a felony under the Espionage Act, but the charges were later dismissed. And there's another one. Reality Winner, a former military contractor, was not so lucky. In 2000, her last name is really Winner? I guess it is Winner. In 2018, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison for leaking a classified intelligence report about, oh, what do you know? Here we go again, Russia. Interference in the 2016 election to The Intercept. So that is relatively, that's pretty recent for us, you guys. That's 2018. Now, there have been changes. How was the law applied in recent years? The highest profile recent accusation of Espionage Act violations have involved leakers, not spies. So this has been a change here. It is not so much that the government is focusing more on leaks of classified information, rather that prosecutors have more tools at their disposal to make their case. With emails, text messages, and other technology, the government can easily trace a document and prove who leaked the information. So I want you to keep that in mind when we think about the fact that they could be applying this same act to Donald Trump. So now we're going to go into that part here. What does the act mean for Trump? It is not clear why Mr. Trump had classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. There is no evidence yet that he is planning to release the material. Nevertheless, mishandling sensitive documents and removing them from a secure facility is still prohibited and can put national secrets at risk. Well, if that's the case, then why weren't they looking at Hillary Clinton some kind of way with her emails? Someone let me know. This is a long article. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but they don't even mention, that's right, Ray. They don't even mention Julian Assange, not once in this article. This is just something to keep in mind. I mean, if we're going to be fair, and this last portion here, it may be difficult to determine who precisely brought the secret documents to Mar-a-Lago, who decided to store them there, and the extent of Mr. Trump's direct involvement. It is also possible that if there were no unauthorized disclosure of the documents and prosecutors do not find any criminal intent, the Justice Department could decide not to prosecute. That could make an investigation into why the documents were leaked to Mar-a-Lago particularly crucial. One important caveat: the Espionage Act includes a gross negligence standard, meaning a prosecutor does not have to prove criminal intent. I will say this again. A prosecutor does not have to prove criminal intent. Still, legal experts say that for the government, the priority is likely retrieving classified and sensitive documents and making sure they are properly stored rather than being in a box at Mar-a-Lago. If the government thinks it has reclaimed all of the secret documents, prosecutors could decide not to proceed further with the legal case. But how the investigation will unfold is unclear. So, has any president ever been charged with violating this act? No. But in 1918, Eugene Debs, the socialist candidate for president, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for a speech criticizing the wartime draft. Still, 3 years later, Mr. Debs again ran for president, this time from prison. Oh, would you look at that? We had a socialist run for president back in 1918. Not once, but twice. And one of those times he even ran from prison. But if you mention that now, oh God, how dare you bring up that idea? And it's 2022. So this is why I say a lot of times mainstream media presents these left policies as radical. I just want to remind you, if you look at history, they're really not radical. So that brings me to this clip from Russell and Kim, because that is something that they get into in this discussion here. So let's take a peek at this.
And the current investigation and the potential that Trump will be charged under the Espionage Act, which we colloquially at this channel refer to the "we don't like what you're saying" act. The Julian Assange, you're going to jail wherever you are in the world, we're putting you in prison act. What do you think about these current Trump charges? Do you think there is legitimate concern, or do you think this is ultimately an attempt to stop him running in 2024 so the Democrat Party don't have to evolve to, to represent people in a more obvious way?
Right. To actually represent the people, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're going to, well, it's hard to say because they've just gone after the guy for 6 years straight, maybe even longer, trying to get him, trying to somehow ensure that, well, they're trying to pin him, right? They're trying to say, well, you are for sure a Russian asset of some kind, a Putin puppet of some sort, a Manchurian candidate. And they've been trying to tie him to Russia for the longest time to no avail. I mean, there's people that dispute that and say, no, we found that there was these meetings and we found this and we found that and we found, but they really have not been able to prove that Donald Trump is against the United States, that he is a traitor to the country, operating on behalf of Russia to help Russia for whatever reason, his own financial gain, or because, I don't know, he's somehow loyal to Russia in some way.
They've actually been trying to pin something on Donald Trump since the day he announced he was running. Like, they really have. They've tried multiple things. They even tried, remember they tried to go through with the impeachment? None of those things seemed to work. Russiagate was a phenomenal disaster and embarrassing, honestly. I feel like if you were part of the Democratic Party and you were like really pushing Russiagate, I feel like that was an embarrassment for you. Seriously. But they've been trying to really get him on something.
Shape or form. I don't exactly know where they're thinking, what line of reasoning they think Donald Trump would have to be such a person, but that is certainly where they've been headed for the last 6 years. And so with the Espionage Act and investigating him under the Espionage Act, the Espionage Act, as you mentioned, is an act that has been used since the beginning of the time that it was formed. It was formed around World War I. It's been around for a little over 100 years now. And when it was formed, it was because back then, right before World War I, they didn't really have any way, they didn't have a law really on the books that prevented people, particularly foreign nationals living in the United States, from sharing state secrets or any sort of information with foreign, what would be enemy governments. They didn't really have anything on the books like that. They had treason, and being a traitor to the country, you needed to be an American. The Espionage Act was designed to be a bit broader, to say if you're against the war effort or if you're against the national defense of the country, you could be charged under the Espionage Act. And because they wrote it so broad, in the beginning, there was all of this debate actually around the Espionage Act about the First Amendment and the First Amendment rights of people. They wanted to be able to go against people, go after people who were just anti-war activists. And even though there's...
Oh, did you hear what Kim just said? Let's bring that back. Oh boy, because some things just don't change.
Amendment and the First Amendment rights of people. They wanted to be able to go against people, go after people who were just anti-war activists.
They wanted to originally go after people that were anti-war activists. And when you look at certain levels of censorship, whether it's on YouTube, PayPal, Venmo, name all of them, they're doing the same thing today. They've been doing that to Jackson Hinkle. They've been doing that to Gray Zone. They've done that to Whitney Webb. I think Whitney Webb is gone off YouTube now. I don't think she's on there anymore. But they've done that a lot to the anti-war voices, anti-war activists. Now, that was all going all the way back then to World War I. And we still see that happening today, but this time in a different form, right? This time it's done from those platforms, but it's still being done. They're still censoring you, just through a different method. So what is it my dad always says? The more things change, the more things stay the same. So they haven't really, I've been thinking for a while, like growing up, like we gained more free speech, like as I got older, right? But if you really think about it, not necessarily, because they've still had ways of censoring people and censoring information, but it was done in a different way. So they've still been kind of doing that. Interesting, huh?
And even though there's plenty of debate around that, unfortunately, the Espionage Act has been used quite successfully in many occasions against people who were just outspoken against the war. I mean, there were people, they would go after anarchists, they would go after socialists, they went after anyone who was just an anti-war activist. There wasn't a lot of support for World War I, and a lot of these people, a lot of people just weren't really cool with the draft. They questioned the motivations of the government, and anyone who did that was at risk of being charged with the Espionage Act.
Isn't that crazy? So that just kind of reminds me of the people who came out against the war in Iraq. That reminds me of those voices that did that. It reminds me of people like Phil Donahue, right? Just think about all the people back then when it was not popular to do so, when they came out and spoke out against the war in Iraq. Those people were basically, their careers were ruined after that, just for being against it. Then to come to find out after the fact that, oh, they lied to us about the war in Iraq. So Phil Donahue was actually in the right. But see, this is why I'm telling you, the censorship has really been going on all along. It's just been done in a different way. They censored Phil Donahue. They took him off the air. They censored Arsenio Hall. They took him off the air. They got rid of his show and said, you got to go, because he said things that they didn't want him to say. They censored Ellen DeGeneres. They canceled her show and took her off the air. And I'm not talking about her talk show. I'm talking about when Ellen had an actual sitcom, because she talked about things they didn't want her to talk about. So when you look back on it, the censorship has always been there. So this is an interesting discussion here.
In fact, there was one gentleman who made a movie. His movie was about the Revolutionary War. Okay, it wasn't even about World War I. It was about the Revolutionary War. And in fact, it was a silent film. There were no words. But because it depicted the Revolutionary War, which was the British against against Americans, and there was fighting and shots fired by British over to Americans in this silent film. And at that time in World War I, the Brits were allies. They deemed this like speech against the war, and they actually threw the guy in jail, a filmmaker who made a...
Yeah. So that was the movie that was mentioned in the first article that I was just reading. Was it the first article, second article? That was the movie that was mentioned in that article.
Silent film. They threw him in jail for that movie that had nothing to do with World War I. So the Espionage Act has been used over time just against political dissidents. And then, of course, it morphed and they went really after people that they thought were communists and in bed with Russia. And then it really didn't get much use for a while. It kind of remained silent for a while. And then it sort of picked up during the Bush and Obama years, where, previously, prior to the Obama administration, there were like three people ever that were in media journalism that were targeted with the Espionage Act. And then under the Obama administration, I think that rose up to like 19. Some of them started under the Bush administration, to be fair. But yeah, it's an act.
Notice she said under the Obama administration, that number increased. And this is why, so this is a good example that you can point to when people say you got to vote for the lesser of two evils. This is an example that you can tell people and say, wait a minute, how's the lesser of two evils really working out when it comes to censorship, when it goes to things like the Espionage Act? Because under Barack Obama, that number increased. That's why I tell people there really is no lesser of two evils. Evil is evil. You're still dealing with the same issues. It's just done in a different way. Now, that was done under a so-called Democrat president.
That is not used. Now they do use it. So it's not just targeting whistleblowers and journalists and political dissidents and anti-war activists and socialists. And, interestingly enough, mostly targeting people coming from the left. And now the left is championing it now that it's going to be used against potentially Donald Trump. But it's also been used against CIA and federal agents who have possessed or leaked classified information to the press or used it for their books or something along those lines. So they have now in those cases don't get much press, but it is used against people who mishandle classified information, but not typically. Typically, if a person mishandles classified information, which happens all the time in the government, they just get a slap on the wrist. They get maybe their privileges, their classified, top secret privileges revoked or something, but they don't go to jail. They don't get charged with the Espionage Act.
Exactly. So that's the difference with this situation in particular, is that it looks like they are trying to, or possibly trying to, charge him with that. And this is not common. So, think what you want about Trump, but I feel like they're going to extremes with this because it's him. So I'll say it again. I think they're trying to make an example out of him. I'm not saying I agree with everything that he's done. I don't agree with a lot of things that Trump has done, but I think in this particular situation, I think they're trying to make an example out of him.
And the fact that Democrats, not just Democrats, it's actually the establishment, I would say, coming from both sides, because Trump is hated by the establishment, the anti-populist establishment on both sides. They're coming after him, and they're using now to go after him in Mar-a-Lago, to search his home, to raid the home of a former U.S. president. They're using the Espionage Act, knowing that the average person doesn't really understand that it's been used historically in this very nefarious way to go after just political dissidents and people criticizing the government. And so they just, the average person sees a headline and sees Espionage Act. That's spying. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. This must be very bad. Donald Trump, they finally got him for being the Putin puppet we always knew he was. I mean, that's how people think and how they're busy. They don't have time to dig deeper to understand these what's really going on.
And that's why, she's right. That's why I wanted to explain to you guys what it was and how it's been used in the past. Because it's true. I think most people, when they hear that, they do think, oh, so it's true. He really was. It's a spying thing or whatever. Not necessarily. So that's why I wanted to break that down for you, so you understand that it can be used in different ways.
And so, Trump being investigated under the Espionage Act, Hillary Clinton was investigated for the same sort of thing with the emails. When it came down to her emails, that would have fallen under the same act. And
that's what I was talking about.
Yet, with Trump, I think there's a much higher chance that he actually does get charged under the Espionage Act. It's pretty flimsy. And the thing is, the government doesn't have to disclose to us what it is because it's classified. So
that's a key point right there. That's what I loved about this conversation. That was a key point right there. They don't really have to tell us what those documents are. So he could possibly be charged with this, and we may never know what those documents were. And I will also add this, because she mentioned the issue with Hillary Clinton as well. Why is it that it's more likely that he's going to be charged, but Hillary Clinton wasn't charged? That's why I say I think they're trying to make an example out of him.
So these suddenly, we can hear about it in the news, we can read about it, but we can't really know exactly what the documents were. Was it just a handwritten note on a napkin that he shared with the French president at dinner? We don't know the level of what this document is that they declared to be top secret or confidential. We don't know. And we can't know because it is secret, confidential, or top secret. So
That's right.
So but the chances of Trump being actually charged, I mean, I would think they would have charged him by now if they really truly had something. I think there's a lot of questions though around this. They knew he had these documents. He hasn't been president for a year and a half. They've known he's been in possession of these documents. We have to remember the guy is surrounded by Secret Service still. So they would have known that he would have had these. In fact, they say that the leaker that it worked on behalf of the FBI was a Secret Service agent. So people are around him all the time. Why would it take them a year and a half to go and collect documents this sensitive? And okay, maybe then we could say, well, they just found out about these particular documents. Well, again, why did they applied for the warrant and they still took 2 days to go into his house? If it was really truly that sensitive, wouldn't they have done it right away? But they got,
or if it was that important, where's the sense of urgency? We like to bring up that phrase a lot on RBN, if you guys haven't noticed. We like to bring up sense of urgency. Seriously, like, what was the delay?
Got the warrant on a Friday. They waited till a Monday. I mean, the FBI works on Saturdays and Sundays. I can guarantee you that. So why did they wait? I mean, there's just this concerted effort to take the guy down. And I think that, obviously it's backfiring. People are then rallying around him. People that don't even like him, that have hated him, say, wow, there must be something this guy's really doing to upset the establishment if they're going this hard after him. And now they're even, nonstop. And now they're trying to use the Espionage Act against the guy, claiming that the former US president of the United States is somehow a spy for a foreign country. I mean,
I just want to add in here, and I mentioned this when I was on Fault Lines. I really feel like all this is doing is just making Trump more popular. Like, I'm sorry, but this is not the win that Democrats believe that it is. This is not a win. I think I'm listening to a lot of like Democrats and they're just like, yeah, they finally got him. This is great. We're never going to have to worry about him again. And I'm just sitting here and I'm listening to them and I'm thinking to myself like, wow, they really think this is a win. They really think this is a win. It's not. Actually, it's just going to make people despise the Democratic Party even more. Point fingers at the Democratic Party for some of the same hypocrisy. And then also, I feel like this is just going to make it more popular.
Do you suppose then that it's, given that you have, if not dismissed, then certainly questioned the more legitimate motives that would underwrite that action, do you think it's simply that Trump is regarded as a problem that has to be solved in terms of 2024, or indeed the idea that there is a viable alternative to establishment rule? Just for transparency, in case you don't know, I'm not a person that's sort of at all pro-Trump. I feel that the systemic problems in American and indeed global government are so deep that there's a requirement for a massive overhaul. And what interests me is the advancing of the agenda of decentralized power, localized power, where ordinary people have as much democratic, financial, emotional and spiritual control over their own lives and the lives of their family and community, consensually and democratically as possible. I don't think that there's any demagogic kind of figure that's going to emerge to solve those problems. I think it's a problem that we have to solve collectively. But it seems that Trump is, do you think that it's simply to sort of nullify the threat of Trump and the idea of Trump and what Trump represents, i.e. a sort of a populist anti-establishment figure that's providing, even if only rhetorically, an alternative to the neoliberalist establishment?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Trump is not the guy that's going to really make significant change in taking this all down. You know, he's not the savior of freeing us from the global, establishment that is rising up. But certainly his rhetoric, and certainly he is opening the eyes of people and waking people up in a way. I mean, even when he first started and talked about fake news, when I first heard that coming out of him, I was like, oh my gosh, fake news.
She just mentioned something that I think is important as well. He criticized the media. He criticized mainstream media. So that was definitely a no-no.
But him saying it over and over, suddenly now, I think many of us agree the news is very fake, right? I mean, we've woken up to that.
Yeah.
So I think Trump, they absolutely are doing everything they can to prevent him from running in 2024, to eliminate that threat. Now, the Espionage Act itself, if he does get, let's say, charged and even convicted of the Espionage Act, that does not actually prevent him from running for office. But one of the other, on the warrant, there were three. I'm
going to go back here just a little bit, but I thought that point there is important to note, because I think some people are assuming that, but there's a catch here. She's going to explain it. Let me get into that.
To prevent him from running in 2024, to eliminate that threat. Now, the Espionage Act itself, if he does get, let's say, charged and even convicted of the Espionage Act, that does not actually prevent him from running for office. But one of the other, on the warrant, there were three different investigations that they were, or three reasons for them to go in. And one of them was a different act that actually would prevent him, if convicted, would prevent him from running for federal office. So that's really interesting. And that one would be much easier for them to get him for. So I think the Espionage Act one is just to kind of get the public to turn on him. They're still trying to get everybody to turn away from his rhetoric. They don't like the things he's saying. So if the man's a traitor, how dare you? How dare you even prop him up at all? But
I still don't think that's going to turn people away from Trump. See, here's the thing. I mean, those of you that have followed me for a while, you know this. Like, I've lived in pretty conservative areas. I've lived in blue areas, so-called progressive areas. Like, I mean, I moved here to Massachusetts from South Carolina. I went to undergrad there. And I'm just going to tell you, my parents are still there. They're retired there. When I go home to visit my parents, I'm just going to tell you, bud, because a lot of the people I know there, a lot of the people there are conservative, just FYI. But I will say this, is that what's happening here, this is not changing their minds about Trump. In fact, I'm going to tell you something else. The more that the Democratic Party, or rather it's the United States government, the DOJ, whoever, all the alphabet group people, the more they try to come after him and attack him and criticize him, that actually makes his base even more protective of him. And I don't know why people believe this, that if they can get him on something, like Kim was saying, like if they got him on, Espionage Act, that kind of thing, that's going to turn people away from him. If people were going to turn away from Donald Trump, they would have done so long ago. They had plenty of opportunities to turn away from him, including other things that he has said or things that he has done. And they chose not to. When Donald Trump told people that if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue, his supporters would still back him, I'm sorry, but I can kind of see that. But attacking him and criticizing him and calling him all these names and saying that he had classified information and saying he went against the government, it is not going to turn his supporters away from him. I'm just telling you that firsthand. I know several Trump supporters, and no matter what you say to a lot of them about what he's doing, whether it's something that's wrong or whatever, they're not turning away from him. So I really don't think that's why I said this is not the gotcha they think it's going to be. And I'll go ahead and I'll tell you this much. Let's say that he does go down. Let's say that Donald Trump does go down. I don't think that's going to happen, but let's say that he does. You know what's going to happen? Somebody else will come up after him. And if Democrats are afraid of how vile they think that Trump was, he'll be nothing compared to the next person that comes up after him. Because that person will have more rage. That person will have, there's already been a precedent. They've already seen Donald Trump do it, right? So the person that comes up after him is going to be even more, I would say, hostile, maybe even brutal. So this is the thing, like, they really believe that if you get rid of the leader, then the problem goes away. The problem doesn't go away. You just replace one leader with another one. And that's for all politics, by the way. And that's what will happen. I'm calling it now. Watch. The next person who comes up after him, he will be worse than Trump. Watch.
The other act that they're investigating him for, according to the warrant, is one that has to do with the destruction. It's the withholding or theft or destruction of federal property, of federal documents. And if you are charged and convicted of that, you cannot run for federal office. So, and that one, they probably would be way more likely to get him for. So one is for optics and one is to prevent him from running for office.
Well, what did you think about
There
that
you
conversation?
go.
Don't you feel?
So the name of this video, if you want to check out the entire vid, is Hang On, Is This a Joke? And that's on Russell Brand's podcast, Under the Skin. Really cool podcast. You guys should check it out. I don't know if you watch it on your own or if you only watch the clips that I show on here, but you should definitely check it out. It's pretty cool.